Taking the train. The Tour de France was 1 year old. Nobody had worked out yet that a race nobody can watch is a race nobody can police. Riders vanished into the dark between towns, and some of them reappeared considerably fresher than physics allowed. They took lifts in cars. They took the train. Maurice Garin, who had won the first Tour in 1903, crossed the line first again in 1904. Then the French Cycling Federation spent 5 months going through the complaints. The entire top 4 was thrown out: Maurice Garin, Lucien Potier, César Garin, Hippolyte Aucouturier. 29 riders in total, including every stage winner in the race. Garin got a 2-year ban. Potier was banned for life. The win went to Henri Cornet, who had finished 5th, nearly 3 hours behind. He was 19 years old, and he is still the youngest winner in the history of the race. By most accounts, Cornet was not spotless either. He was simply the cleanest man left standing. It took the organizers 5 months to work out who had won. Tacks and ambushes. The riders were not the only problem. The crowd was worse. Nails and tacks went down on the road in front of the favorites, sometimes thrown by rival riders, sometimes by supporters who had money on somebody. Punctures were not bad luck in 1904. They were a tactic. On the second stage, on the climb out of Saint-Étienne, a crowd of local supporters blocked the road in the dark and started beating riders. They were protecting their man. Maurice Garin was hit. The Italian Giovanni Gerbi was hurt badly enough that his race ended there. The race director's car came up the road and shots were fired into the air to break the crowd up. Henri Desgrange, the man who invented the Tour, wrote afterwards in his own newspaper that the race was finished. Killed by its own success and by blind passion, he spent that winter convinced he had murdered the Tour de France. He then ran it for another 32 years. The tow, getting pulled along by a car, is the oldest trick in the sport, and the version they came up with is genuinely elegant. Hanging off a car door is obvious. Anyone can see it. So instead, a cork, or a small piece of rubber, tied to a length of wire. A passenger in the car holds one end. The rider bites down on the cork. Both hands stay on the bars. The rider is sitting up, pedaling gently, apparently just riding along, and being dragged up a mountain at 30 kilometers an hour by a Peugeot. Motorbikes work too, and still do. In the amateur races around here, the tow is not a historical curiosity. It is somebody's uncle on a scooter. The trick never really disappeared. It got shorter. It got legal adjacent: ether, strychnine, and cocaine. Here is the part that makes this chapter strange. For the first 60 years of this sport, none of it was cheating. There was no banned list. There was nothing to break. Riders used ether on a handkerchief to dull the pain in their legs, strychnine in tiny doses, which is rat poison at larger ones, as a stimulant, cocaine, chloroform, alcohol, constantly, because it was easier to carry than water, and nobody knew any better. In 1924, the Pélissier brothers, Henri and Francis, quit the Tour and sat down in a cafe with the journalist Albert Londres. They emptied their bags onto the table in front of him and showed him the pills. Londres wrote it up under the title that stuck to the sport for 50 years, The Convicts of the Road. They were not confessing to anything. There was nothing to confess to. They were complaining about the working conditions. They were not hiding it. They were complaining about it. The sticky bottle. The tow survived. It just got a lot shorter and a lot better dressed. A rider drops back to the team car for bottles. The sports director holds the bottle out through the window. The rider takes it and then simply forgets to let go for 2 or 3 seconds while the car keeps driving. That is a free tow. On a steep climb, 3 seconds of engine is worth more than 3 minutes of legs. It is illegal. It is written down as illegal. It is also completely universal, and everybody in the convoy knows the actual rule, which is not written down anywhere. You get away with it if it does not look ridiculous on camera. Commissaires hand out fines and time penalties when a driver holds on for 6 seconds up a mountain with a helicopter overhead. This is the one form of cheating cycling has quietly decided to keep. Not because it is harmless, because policing it properly would mean admitting how often it happens. Drafting the cars and the motorbikes. Same principle. No bottle required. A rider crashes or punctures, gets a new bike, and then has to get back to a peloton riding at 50 kilometers an hour. The legal way is a hard chase. The other way is to sit in the slipstream of the team car and let the diesel do it. There are rules limiting how long a car can shelter a rider, and there are penalties handed out for it every season. The bigger argument is the motorbikes. And nobody chose that one. Television motos, photographers, race radio. A motorbike sitting 5 meters ahead of a rider on a climb measurably changes how hard he has to work, and on a mountain road there is often nowhere for it to go. In 2016 on Mont Ventoux, the crowd was so tight that a moto had to brake, and Chris Froome, Richie Porte, and Bauke Mollema rode straight into the back of it. Froome ended up running up the mountain on foot without a bike. Nobody was cheating that day. The vehicles were still deciding the race, cutting the course. The most basic idea in the history of competition: go a shorter way. In cyclocross, it is a meter of tape. Cut a corner, take the inside line through a barrier, and hope the commissaire is looking at somebody else. In mass participation, Gran Fondos, it is an entire loop. Riders skip a section, miss a timing mat, and rejoin at the front of a group they were never with. The thing that killed it is the thing nobody in 1904 could have imagined. The riders volunteer the evidence themselves. They upload the file, a GPS trace with a hole in it, a climb ridden in a time that would win the Tour de France, a segment covered at a steady 60 kilometers an hour with no heart rate data at all, which usually means the bike was in a car. And remember what these people are cheating for: a place in an amateur event, no prize money, a plastic medal, and a number on a website, which somehow makes it worse. Buying a victory. 2 riders go clear. One is stronger. The other has a price. Riders have talked about races being bought and sold since the sport had spectators. Proving a specific one is a different thing entirely. Liège-Bastogne-Liège, April 2010. Alexander Vinokourov and Alexander Kolobnev ride away together and hold off the chase. Vinokourov attacks inside the final kilometer and wins. A year later, a Swiss magazine published emails said to have been exchanged between the 2 riders and reported bank transfers of 100,000 and 50,000 euros. The material came out of a wider Italian investigation. Belgian prosecutors brought charges of active and passive corruption. Both riders denied it throughout. In November 2019, the criminal court in Liège acquitted both of them. The judge found the case unproven. The emails could not be verified, and the defense gave an explanation for one of the payments as a property investment. The prosecutor's office said the 2 had been given the benefit of the doubt. So, it was alleged, the documents were published, both men denied it, and nobody was convicted. That is where it sits, and that is where it stays. Amphetamines and the death of Tom Simpson. This is where it stops being funny. The 13th of July, 1967, stage 13 of the Tour, the climb of Mont Ventoux, around 45 degrees on the bare rock at the top. Tom Simpson was a former world champion and the first British rider to wear yellow. About 1.5 kilometers from the summit, he started riding across the road instead of up it, and fell. Spectators put him back on the bike. He rode a few hundred meters more. Then he collapsed again, and he did not get up. The autopsy found amphetamines in his system, and alcohol. There were tubes of amphetamine in the pockets of his jersey. Heat and dehydration did the rest. 7 years earlier, at the Rome Olympics, the Danish rider Knud Enemark Jensen had collapsed and died during the 100-kilometer team time trial. His death was blamed on a stimulant at the time. The official cause given was heat stroke, and historians have argued about it ever since. Between them, those 2 deaths forced the first anti-doping laws and the first tests in cycling. When testers turned up at the 1966 Tour, the riders protested by getting off and walking. There is a memorial on the Ventoux now. People still leave bidons on it. EPO and the Festina affair. Erythropoietin is a hormone your kidneys make to tell your body to produce red blood cells. More red cells means more oxygen. More oxygen means everything in this sport. From around 1990, there was a synthetic version available and no test for it whatsoever. None. Riders were running blood thick enough that some of them reportedly set alarms in the night to get up and move around. The UCI's answer in 1997 was a hematocrit limit of 50%. Above it, you were declared unfit to race for 15 days on health grounds. It was not a doping test. It could not detect anything. It was a ceiling. Then, on the 8th of July, 1998, French customs stopped a car at the border near Lille. Inside was Willy Vogt, a soigneur for the Festina team, and roughly 230 doses of EPO, along with growth hormone and testosterone. The entire Festina team, including the reigning #1 rider in the world, was thrown off the tour. Riders went on strike mid-race. The 1998 tour almost did not finish. Blood bags. Once EPO could be detected, the answer was to go back to something older and cruder. Take blood out weeks in advance, store it, put it back in before the race. Nothing foreign enters the body, so there is nothing foreign to find. It is your own blood, and it is very hard to argue with. In 2004, a test finally arrived for the sloppy version, homologous transfusion, meaning somebody else's blood. Tyler Hamilton was flagged at the Athens Olympics and again at the Vuelta. He kept the Olympic gold at the time because the backup sample had been frozen improperly. He handed it back years later, after he had stopped denying everything. Then, in May 2006, Spanish police raided the operation of Dr. Eufemiano Fuentes in Madrid. Operación Puerto. They found freezers of frozen blood bags labeled with code names, a client list running to dozens of athletes, and a filing system. On the eve of the 2006 Tour de France, riders were pulled out of the race, including the previous year's runner-up and the man who had just won the Giro. For years afterwards, a Spanish court ordered the remaining bags destroyed rather than tested. It took a long legal fight to stop that happening. Nobody outside cycling was ever named. Cortisone and the TUE loophole. This one is different, and I want to be careful with it, because nothing in this chapter is against the rules. A therapeutic use exemption lets an athlete take a banned substance if a doctor documents a genuine medical need and a panel approves it. That system exists for good reasons. Asthma is real. Allergies are real. Athletes are allowed to be ill. In September 2016, a hacking group published medical records taken from the World Anti-Doping Agency's database, covering athletes across many sports. Among the cycling files were approvals for injections of triamcinolone, a powerful corticosteroid, signed off before major races. It was legal. It was authorized. No rule was broken, and nobody was sanctioned for it. The argument that followed was not about legality at all. It was about whether a substance banned in competition should be signable days before the biggest race of the year, on a form, by a team doctor, with a panel that never sees the athlete. The rule permits this. The question is whether it should. Clenbuterol and the contaminated steak. On the second rest day of the 2010 Tour de France, Alberto Contador tested positive for clenbuterol. The amount was almost nothing, 50 picograms per milliliter, hundreds of times below the level laboratories were even required to be able to detect. The lab found it because it happened to be very good. His defense was a steak, beef brought over from Spain, from an animal that had been given clenbuterol illegally to build muscle. It is not a ridiculous story. Contaminated meat is a documented problem in some countries. The Spanish Federation initially cleared him. The UCI and WADA appealed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. In February 2012, the court rejected the steak. It found meat contamination unlikely in Spain and considered a contaminated food supplement the more probable explanation, which, legally, changed nothing because the rule is strict liability. What is in you is your responsibility. Whatever put it there. 2-year ban. The 2010 Tour de France and the 2011 Giro d'Italia taken off him. Microdosing against the biological passport. By the late 2000s, the direct tests were finally good, so the method changed shape. Not big doses, small ones, often intravenous, often at night. Time to sit inside the window where the body clears the substance before a tester can knock on the door at 6 in the morning. Saline to bring diluted values back into a normal range. The point was no longer to be undetectable. The point was to be untested at the wrong moment. The response was the athlete biological passport, brought in by the UCI in 2008. Cycling did it first, which is worth saying out loud given the rest of this video. The passport stops chasing the substance. Instead, it records your own blood values over years, hemoglobin, reticulocytes, the ratios between them. Everybody has a normal. A rider can now be charged on the pattern alone, with no positive test anywhere in the file. They stopped looking for the drug. They started looking for the LIE in the numbers. Tramadol and carbon monoxide, two things that were completely legal right up until somebody wrote them down. Tramadol is a synthetic opioid painkiller. It dulls pain, which in a bike race means you can hurt yourself further than your body wants you to. For years, it was not banned, only monitored. In WADA's 2017 monitoring data, 4.4% of in-competition tests on cyclists showed tramadol, and 68% of every tramadol-positive urine sample across 35 Olympic sports came from cycling, 68%, from one sport. The UCI banned it in competition from March 2019 on medical grounds because an opioid that causes drowsiness and loss of concentration in a bunch sprint is a crash waiting to happen. WADA only added it to the prohibited list in January 2024. Carbon monoxide is the newer one, rebreathing a small measured dose of. It is a legitimate laboratory method for measuring total hemoglobin mass. Used repeatedly, the evidence suggests it behaves like altitude exposure and pushes red cell production up on its own. Teams were using it around altitude camps. The UCI banned repeated inhalation outside a medical facility from February 2025, citing health. WADA then went further and added non-diagnostic use of carbon monoxide to the prohibited methods list. In force from January 2026. Measuring is still allowed, everything else is not. The hidden motor. January 2016, the Cyclocross World Championships at Zolder. The under-23 women's race. Femke van den Driesche was 19. While she was out on the course, UCI officials ran a magnetic resonance tablet over the spare bikes in her pit area. One of more than 100 bikes scanned that day. One of them had a Vivax motor inside the seat tube with a battery, operated by a Bluetooth switch hidden under the handlebar tape. She did not attend the hearing and did not defend herself. She said an acquittal was impossible because the bike was in her pit. 6 years, backdated to October 2015 and running to October 2021, 20,000 Swiss francs. Every result annulled, including her European under-23 title. It was the first sanction for technological fraud in the history of the UCI. She retired at 19 and has never raced again.
If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.